I'm now going to walk you all through how you chart your standard deviation and to make sure that you get it right every single time. So the first thing that I like to do is I like to find where the big move actually happens before I chart my standard deviation, which I've drawn a box around so you can actually see. So this was the accumulation that happened prior to the big move. A lot of people will mark out these two levels, which these two levels, even though it started the big move, that doesn't essentially mean that that is the big move. We can see a very rapid decrease and an abundance of sell orders in this kind of location. So what actually happens is that we want to look for these two legs. Legs are pretty much wicks where price tended to accumulate in or essentially have a point of resistance prior to the actual full dump. Now, what I really like to see prior to this is a CHOCH. CHOCH is essentially just a change in character. It's kind of just like a SMC, technical analysis term, and it's pretty much just to identify an early warning that a current market trend is kind of losing its momentum and it may be time for it to reverse. So I like to pair that with my standard deviation just so we have a clear picture that standard deviation, the fib retracement tool, this is the points that we actually want to plot to make sure that our levels are correct. So I went ahead and I plotted them for you guys, that we started up top, right? And then we dragged it to the bottom of this wick. And we can see that our standard deviation started to go ahead and react. We can see a reaction down at this level. And we can see that price reacted initially to negative 2.5. We can see reacted off of it, but we're continuing to push up. So what does that mean? That we're probably going to enter at the negative 2 level. Now, a lot of questions that I get is, how do you know which levels are more valid than others? Well, the only actual logical answer to this, and if anyone tells you otherwise, they're wrong. You really want to pair this with multiple confluences. Now, a lot of people also ask me, what are these confluences that I should be looking into? Well, essentially, you should be using supply and demand, and you should very much get yourself familiar with supply and demand, because pairing large supply zones and rejection zones or demand zones with standard deviation is a really, really powerful tool. Another really powerful tool is OTE. OTE is Fibonacci. Essentially, what we're trying to do is the optimal trade entry and seeing if a Fibonacci level or OTE matches with a point that is going to be an A+ setup. An even better setup would be if it's in one of the demand or supply zones. Now, a lot of people also like to go to fair value gaps, inverse fair value gaps, or I personally like PO3D or POC. And a lot of these can be touched up in other YouTube videos, but essentially these are all confluences that we can use to maximize our standard deviation levels to ensure that these levels are essentially valid, and that's where we should put our limit orders rather than others.